Really excited to have Inez joining us today. Inez is a chef turned product person, experienced with regulated industries, including IoT, B2C, and B2B. She currently works as a product coach at Founders Factory, a UK-based startup accelerator and venture studio. And she's worked in a variety of different product roles, previously as a head of product at Arc Solutions and a lead product and led product innovation at Tax Systems. Inez has also appeared quite a bit on Mind the Product's different content and podcasts and things like that. And I'm sure she'll have a ton of really great knowledge to share today.
The topic of today is quite dear to me, as Scott and I were chatting beforehand. This is a bit of a personal journey that I would like to share with you. And let's kick things off. So where does this all come from? Design strategy. This comes a little bit from me and my background. Growing up, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, mostly because I wanted to do everything. And I decided to start my journey with a BA in design, a bachelor's in design. And that journey started in Lisbon. The design school that I attended was quite interesting because they had a 360 perspective on design. So technically speaking, I can design houses up until 1 floor. Fact. But I thought that this design thing, at least at the time, was quite new to it. I'd had no previous experience. And I thought that it wasn't really enough for me. And everyone around me was so much more talented. And so I decided that maybe my career, my future wasn't really design, because I needed more context. I needed more that vision. And I was having this conversation with the teacher there. And she looked at me quite puzzled, and she said, "But Inez, that's what design is understanding the context and is setting that vision, is communicating that." And that kind of stayed with me. And this was a conversation held possibly 11 years ago, telling a bit my age. And this was a little bit of a seed to me to continue exploring what is it that I wanted to do. So like Scott mentioned, I did have my cake design business. Here's some of the examples of the cakes I made while here in the UK, because the cake design business was back in Lisbon. But I also found that I needed a little bit more because I was good at the cakes, not so good at the business part, maybe too heavy on the design side. And then my exploration continued working with other organizations. So I've done a little bit of everything. Worked in government, worked in as a salesperson, worked in HR and ops, and then as a product person in multiple areas, like Scott mentioned. But that journey has now come to a very interesting loop, because recently I completed an MBA, and that has given me the context and the grounds for this conversation today. So this talk today, just a bit of a caveat, really. It's a bit how design influences my approach. I would like to also talk a little bit about the strategy theme, and how everything is strategy today. How we can try to find a method in between the madness or not, and try to bring you a bit of a high level of a case study and an actual product that I worked. It's not about design is awesome and it should be the only perspective of things, if that makes sense. I value every single area of business. I am a product person, not a designer. Don't try to be a designer. It's like the product person who has engineer as a background and tries to be the engineer. It's like, no. It's more about sharing that mindset and sharing that perspective. So why does it matter? Why is this important to share this perspective? So we, as product people, we always come from completely different backgrounds. And I find this aspect fascinating, and that individuality brilliant. And so we should bring more voices to the table of how your previous experience and how you you like to work, how does your brain work, and how do you apply that on a day-to-day, because it's a very challenging job. It's about, like you told you a little bit of a snippet really quickly about my journey, but it's about the cycles, but the layers to the cycles as well, and how you keep adding to your layers, a little bit like what we do as well as product people. It's a story that we tell, and it's how we position the story. Ultimately, this design mentality helps me with a bunch of stuff, with my exploration mindset, accepting that things are not always as we expect, and what do you do with it? You create value in the power of the whole. How can you use your materials to your own benefit? The storytelling aspects, but essentially it's about grounding your business decisions, because sometimes you don't really understand where things come from. And so sometimes design can help you. But I'd like to start with the strategy piece. So what do you think strategy is? And I'm going to put a poll together to do a bit of a word. Let's see if this works or not. Bury me if it doesn't. But the idea is to give you some time to think as I travel in the mayonnaise, as we say in Portuguese, when you're trying to just fill in the space. So based on your experience and what you've seen, there's no right or wrong answers. It's about your experience, what you've seen. Have you actually seen a strategy? What is strategy for you in your context? So if you can pick up your phone, scan that lovely QR code, or go to slido.com and type in that 2783688, call now or miss this opportunity forever. I sound like one of those sellers. I've never been on this side of Slido. I'm actually quite curious about how this is going to turn out. Okay, exciting. I don't know if you can see what I'm seeing, but you see like 3 people are typing. I don't know how big this word map is going to be. 4. Awesome. Can see some GPS, a plan, a long-term vision. A few people talking about long-term vision. A game plan to achieve a goal. We'll talk about games as well. That's very, wow, long-term vision seems to be winning. A guiding light, the direction, the plan, right? Start thinking about how, if you break this down as product people, the guiding light and the plan, normally the guiding light is given by the goals and the vision, and etc. And then the plan is how do you get there, right? So this just feeds into how strategy can mean so many things and can be applied to so many different levels, right? So thank you so much for participating, and we can come back to this if other people want to continue contributing, even though you'll be cheating, because then I'll be talking a bit more about strategy. But its origins of strategy stem from ancient Greece with war, really, and it's the office or command of a general. And French strategy in the 1800s is the art of a general. So it's essentially you have a goal and you need to have a plan to have a goal. Now, what happens in military context is that there's an enemy. So there are lots to strategy implies defeating someone or mitigating a threat, which is not really talked about in our industry sometimes, but it's worth keeping that in mind. In terms of game theory, the strategy is the moves that you make, but you need to be very clever in terms of it's not just about you focusing on your actions, but also focusing on or trying to preempt what the other person is going to do. So thinking again about that threat, that enemy, that competition edge to it. So strategy coming across again as a factor of something else that we need to have in consideration. And then in business, there's this explanation from Donald and Fredrickson, where they call it's a central, integrated, externally oriented concept of how we will achieve our objectives. So I've highlighted a couple of bits there. So central integrated, so someone was talking about holistic approach, definitely has to be consistent and coherent. Externally oriented, keep that, you see that thread of connection here. It's not just about you and what you do, it's about the impact that we will have outside of your remit. Sometimes the things that you cannot control, how do you handle those, that uncertainty? And then they will help you achieve your objectives. So a couple of strategy, not necessarily frameworks, but positioning. So the same people who gave that, you can see the explanation there of what strategy is and where it sits. So where does it sit in terms of your objectives or mission? You have a bit of a piece that we don't see often, which is strategic analysis. And then you have that, the operational side and how things come to play. And then also interesting, these authors break the strategy into 5 different angles. They talk about the arenas, they talk about the staging, the vehicles, a strategy, the differentiation, the economic logic, and all that. So don't worry about taking screenshots or anything. You can have my slides. I posted all the sources where I took this information from, so you can go and investigate further. And if you're curious about the theme, I have a bunch of other frameworks I can share. So don't worry about that. So as if we think about our own context, I struggle a little bit with this kind of 5 elements of strategy, because when we think about, for example, a traditional retailer, maybe this strategy or this kind of breakdown of strategy might make a lot of sense. But in our context, this whole staging approach, we talk about continuous delivery. So this staging feels very waterfall. The arenas and the vehicles are kind of merged together because your avenues to the market will be, it's online. So your customers will be able to access your products anywhere in the world, provided they speak English. And there's a lot of other bits, like my little comment around product reliability. Well, sometimes we need to test if that's the best direction. So maybe product reliability might not be one of the things, maybe quality assessment, but there's other angles that we need to consider when we think about strategy in our own context, right? So this, first of all, it feels like you'd have to invest a ton of time and money to figure these things out, and especially that strategic analysis. And I don't know how many consulting organizations you'd have to hire to get all of that, those insights. Plus, it doesn't really cater for disruptive products. So if you are disrupting a market, if you're disrupting a whole industry, where would you place all of this? Where would you find your analysis? So what are the inputs to your strategy? Then there's also the concept of the speed and the cadence of your how you get to market, right? So how predictable is your market? Are you going to spend 3 months planning for this and then your market just doesn't exist anymore? So you need to have that in consideration. Can you change the context if it's an unpredictable market? Do your products change the market? Do they create new opportunities? And then also, where does this all fit in terms of digital transformation, right? So if you're moving from being a printing business into a data center, you need to have other things in consideration. So this is where design comes about and saves the world, or design mentality. So design, again, what is design? I love this explanation. Design is to design a design to produce a design. So you have design as a concept, design as an action, design as the plan, and design as the output. This is design. There you go, talk done. No. So you can see there, that's a bit of I could go around and talk about how it is functionality and form and blah, 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 you know, all that stuff. This is a difficult concept to talk about and to enclose in a single talk. Matter of fact, both of these themes are huge, and so I'll do my best in getting there. Let's thinking about design as in design mindset, which is the things that I will be using to do my work, and you probably will use some of this, which is the multidisciplinary aspect of it. So for you to build products, you need to have everyone involved in the organization who will be able to help you in getting clarity to the problem that you're solving and reaching those outcomes that you need to be reaching. It is a holistic approach. As we all know, each department will be thinking about their own goals and their own ideas. What design does is to kind of put everything together and have a 360 view. Not just within the company, but also outside of the organization. For example, identify this is a problem and potentially going outside of the industry to understand who else is dealing with this problem and how did they solve it. We question to learn. This is one of the things that I learned and I have formed that I realized that not everyone has access to is how to give feedback, how to do criticism. So one of my teachers, she banned the word or the expression, I don't like. Everything had to be justified and every criticism had to be framed as a question. So this gave me the background and training to have sometimes really complicated questions. And it's not just about asking why, it's about identifying that, okay, I might not be happy about something that I'm seeing here, but I need to understand where is that coming from. Is it my opinion? Is it because the context isn't right? Is it because I forgot to mention some constraints? So it's useful to think about and reframe your perspective on that. A bias to action and to challenge. So everyone who's worked with a designer will know that challenge is part of their bread and butter because that's how they get to the answers. That's how they get to explore new opportunities. And the bias to action is, okay, this is not clear to me. I'll make you, I'll draw you what I'm talking about, or this is not, we're not sure about this. Let's do a wireframe. So that always constant, let's put this on paper to see if we're getting there or not. Human-centered, I think that this is obvious. We have the ethics touching here as well, and how some designers are great leaders because there's a lot of human in consideration. There's transparency and respect. So this is, for example, when you're running workshops, making sure that you have a safe space to be able to be biased to action, to be able to be holistic, to be able to question and learn. When you're thinking about being human-centered, you also need to be thinking about that. You need to be providing a safe space. And then this is one of my favorite ones is generate optionality. So a lot of what design does, design mindset will always be playing with the tensions in between the business. So for example, profit versus growth. So profit will be using our own resources to to reduce margins versus growth, investing a lot of money to explore new markets and et cetera. So there's a big tension of almost retention and acquisition, right? So identifying instead of having a conversation of do retention or do acquisition, try to identify the elements that are linked together and that will be able to not necessarily compromise, but serve both in a positive way. That's challenging, but that's really interesting. And you cannot have that generate optionality if you're not transparent, if you are not able to listen to criticism and have a conversation. And humans have conversations. There is this concept, I don't know if many of you are familiar with, which is called design management. And this is the first time that I thought linking back and looking back, is the closest thing that I come to understand about product management. So design management combines two of the most complicated things to define, design sciences and management sciences, strategy being part of it, design being part of it, but it's that center and that balance that we'll find design disciplines, design skills, design process, leadership and values, and design management. So how does this all link together, and how can we mash up this? We have design management as layers, if that makes sense. The first layer, the overall, and how design and management links is it's how the organization presents itself, thinking about the externality of things. The organization cultural values, the human side of things, that tension management, but also that cycle management, right? So thinking about the market that you're in, you might have to be a little bit faster, or your high level strategy might be a little bit shorter if you think about that. Then you have the operations, the systems, and the tactics. So this is the space normally where you see the go-to-market strategy aspect. This is also strategy because the plan on how to get there, right? So go-to-market strategy is strategy as well. There's a lot of space for testing here. You get to discuss, do we do partnerships? Do we build our own? Who is our target? So all of this starts forming together and combining our energies. This is where cross-functional, cross-department collaboration comes in very, very handy. And finally, we have the delivery experience. I mean, I don't think that I need to explain to you how the role of user experience, the role of design and user experience, and the tangible aspect and the coordination across product teams, and how do we collaborate to deliver a product. So if you're still awake and you're still with me, hi. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. A bit of a Slido pop-up surprise. Normally on your day-to-day, where do you spend most of your time thinking about your activities? So you sit more on the operations and systems and the tactics? Do you sit more on the strategy? Do you sit more on delivery? I scramble things just to make sure that you're paying attention. It was not a mistake at all. And I know how to use Slido very well, integrated with Google Slides. I'm also very sarcastic, in case you haven't noticed, but yeah. All right, I kind of assume that where most of you would sit, because that's most of product management title. Then you have the product owner. It's a little bit, it depends on the size of the organization, really. So normally operations, systems, and tactics is where everyone from product management to senior product management, sometimes group product manager, will be sitting, and that's where the majority of product people are. Then you have the delivery and experience, which is managing those releases and that experience and those tangibles, the real world stuff, and less in the leadership side. Thank you so much for bearing with me. Moving on, there is, so we have the overall perspective, but then the fuel for design is really knowing your context and constraints. Organizations don't exist in a vacuum, right? Always giving a nod to that externality. So I always find it really useful to do a bit of a short exercise to sometimes to situate myself and to know if my assumptions are still valid, or to bring people in again, that bringing those other disciplines into play, and have an understanding of what is our macro environment. So I'm talking here, macro environment is the economics, the politics, the labor policies, the unemployment rate. So those kind of high level aspects of the business space. Then we think about our industry, and then our industry will be a little bit more defined. See this as a bit of a filtering mechanism almost, to identify those constraints. Where do we sit? what kind of industry is it? Is it a fast, slow, classical? Is it disruptive? What kind of threats and opportunities you have? So all of this will be helping you and shape that vision and shape that go-to-market and shaping that experience, because your customers will be different. The way that your competitors will be working in that space. Do you have competitors? Do you know if you have competitors? If you don't have competitors, that basic premise that your customers are and your users and your buyers and your influencers are already solving the problem somehow. So what are those things and where do they fit in the big picture? Then you have the aspect of your own organization, the company. Who are you as a business? What are your values? What are your mission? What is your purpose? Who are your, how do you make money? If you do, you have freemium model, but how do you what does sustainability look like for you? What are the levers that you're pulling and pushing? And finally, our dearest product. So knowing your product really, really well to know where you sit, to understand your context and your constraints. So also how to knowing the rules so you can bend the rules, right? Or principles in our case. So does it have seasonality factors? Because your strategy would be different based on, if you're thinking about, for example, regulation technology, if you release anything from between end of October until March, nobody's going to pick it up because everyone is just, at least here in the UK, everyone is pretty busy with doing their taxes around that time. So how does that impact you? Just how does everything mash up together based on two areas that we're talking about? So strategy, direction, mission will have a larger focus on the macro environment context and narrower focus on the product. This is rule of thumb, obviously that for, like I was saying before, the wider, the more complicated, the more unpredictable, the more disruptive the market is, you probably will not have a lot of this. You still sit, argument's sake, you still sit in an environment of sorts. You just need to understand what is it. Let's say, for example, Web3. How do you're building stuff from scratch? How does that work? The operations and systems and tactics is almost like an accordion. You're always going back and forth, not just in terms of the information that you need to collect to build products, to think about the strategy, to think about how do you connect pricing with your market, with your user, with your buyer, but also how you're going to communicate all of this. How are you going to communicate your strategy? Because we need to involve other people in the process because we cannot do anything on our own. And finally, you can see that focus is mostly on our product and our data and how do we work with it. The practice aspect, we all know this. I realize that the image is quite small, but I thought it would be interesting to see how that plays with the assets that you normally produce or the processes that you normally go through. So this here is a picture of a space, and there's a big bucket with Post-its because normally that's where we start. We have no idea how to categorize the information that we get, the feedback that we get, and how to identify themes around these. So yeah, if you start with the bucket in the space because you're not wanting to categorize anything, then you're trying to identify themes. Then you try to put those themes into frameworks to be doing testing, to doing more research, to more analysis, prioritization, user journey. How does that fit in the human's life? So you'll be doing all of those exercises as in formalizing your thoughts. A lot of people I know stop here and try to, will go out to the organization and share their mirror boards. From experience, try not to do that. Different people need different levels of communication. And if you can synthesize and put all this down into insights or into product specs, depending on where you work. I'm trying to be as broad as possible here because I feel like you might be coming from different industries and different markets and different product company sizes. Then you'll be moving. One very good way to summarize your thinking and to share with the rest of your organization is your roadmap. Right? So that's a very simple now, next, later type of a situation. And then finally, we'll have a delivery plan. Now think about that. Go to strategy. go-to-market strategy. This is, again, more or less how you'd see that context playing out, and again, how you communicate that context and who's involved in creating that context. You have more experts from inside and outside of your organization on the exploration side, and then more specific to your product and your company on the delivery side. And your product is, I'm here talking about how you launch things, the feedback loops, what you're learning and all that. So the cycles were mostly sitting around the product aspect of things. But let's also not forget that all of this needs to be supported by that design thinking and approach to things. So how you coach your organization to be collaborative. Sometimes in the past, I've been in organizations that weren't necessarily the most collaborative, and you need to coach that. You need to create a safe space. So always keep that in mind, and how you're talking with people inside and outside of your organization. If you're bringing the people at the right time, and I hope this helps mapping everything together of a day or how design plays a very important role in this. Quick case study to wrap up and to show you how this design kind of approach to things has helped me in the past. I'm bringing you an example from an organization I've worked. You probably will be able to join the dots, but I'll try to be as high level as possible here. So from user feedback to launch, the context of this organization is that it was an oil and gas organization. The company was focusing on, this part of the company was focusing on IoT, so Internet of Things, specifically around smart home. Very high levels of competition, not just in the UK market, but also outside the US and other European countries. Predictability of the market is low in the sense of, because competition is high, and when you think about smart homes and Internet of Things, you might think automatically, ooh, Amazon, and they're big, and they'll eat you up. Especially in a B2B market and a B2C market. The organization itself was going through a bit of a transition transformational process of trying to become a little bit more software and digitally minded rather than product minded, but also trying to create the whole cross-functional teams. So created a very interesting opportunity for this design kind of approach to delivering product to exist, because there was a lot of space for exploration. And we had a very demanding customer base, rightfully so. We are producing things that will live in their homes and to control their devices at home. So we need to be careful. And they were quite loud, thankfully, as well. And the biggest product within the company was heating and cooling. From the context in terms of strategy, they were thinking this part of the context, right? Still, and how the high-level strategy. The intention was to do country exploration, but also increase the total addressable market, so TAM, within the home automation. So there were being a lot of products being launched and explored. What I call the horizontal approach to product development. So instead of going deep in one theme, is exploring different themes and exploring different products. This comes out as a lot of MVPs, as you can imagine. But also the way that the channels of distribution were set. One of the channels was partnerships. So we would partner up with oil and gas providers or electricity providers, and that would be a go-to-market, a part of the intention of a go-to-market strategy, which leads us to the next one. So because the biggest products, thinking about going into different countries, we need to think about how heating and cooling work in different countries as well, and how do we connect the dots? So do we have similar systems? So for example, in the US, a lot of the heating and cooling systems are HVAC, which is very different to a lot of homes in the UK, which have an internal heating system that boils up the water, and then the hot water will travel within the house via piping, via pipes, sorry. And so there will be similar case for other countries in Europe. And so we thought if this could be an opportunity to explore a new product within that, less so in the US. So within the new countries I wanted to explore, this matched with a few opportunities in Europe. It was challenging to get what the business was looking forward to new product launches, but also at the same time we had to present business cases to our product launches and provide a whole stack on to justify why we thought that new product would be the most helpful and addressable, achievable one. And so this would go through a lot of cycles of approvals. And this would involve all departments being a part of it, because you had to do a strategy for pricing, strategy for financing, how many years until you break even. So all those conversations, bringing in financing, bringing in commercial teams in, bringing in new country exploration teams in, but also the devices team. And a very important decision in this case was, do we build our own? Because best products experience that people have been having so far was our own built up products, but we also realized that we didn't necessarily have the expertise in-house to build this. And then so we went out to look for other partners and see, pros and cons, and understand within the whole market competition how this would play, but also thinking about it has to integrate with our existing smart home setting. How do we do pricing with this? And how do we make sure that we don't break customer trust? Because remember, if I told you, our customer base was quite vocal about the products, and this had been a product they'd been asking for 4 years. And so we had to be really cautious about how we would loop them into the development system, mostly because this could actually was a bit of a threat for the business, because this could go into direct competition with the hero product at the time. So all those factors and all those constraints and contexts had to be put in consideration here. And finally, because there's an actual device associated to this, you have the packaging design. Different heating systems will need different adapters, and there's no ISO norms for this. So at some point, my Amazon basket looked like I was a plumber. I had a lot of pieces being ordered by Amazon. Understanding how we can support people with installation and onboarding, because they had to do as a self-install product. We weren't sure if people were going to do that or not. So we actually, for example, one of the product testing that we got and that we prioritized, because we realized, okay, there's no point in people testing the app if they cannot install the product in the first place. So we actually had a piping set up in the office where people will go through the onboarding process. And they would have to do the installation themselves. So it's very interesting to go people fiddling around with the piping and etc. But also, how do you do the education? Because if people have already their home heating at home, how do you bring more products into this ecosystem, and how does everything work together, and how do they learn when to have the boiler on, when to have the boiler off, and all those questions. So to wrap things up, a few highlights. It was a best-selling product in the company for the next 2 years after launch. We had over 50% self-installs, and that was massive because, if I go back here, we had to think about the partnerships. We had other selling channels as well. I had to think how everything would tie together. So part of the partnership is, someone coming into your home and checking if your heating is working correctly or not. So we were thinking maybe we can do some sales over there, but then you need to add up service costs and think about the people who are doing the servicing, if they can fit another item in their vans, for example. So those are all considerations that you need to be having. We decided to go for partner building the product, and we had great support. We had to collaborate really closely because every time that they would do software updates, we would have to update our systems as well. We had some negative feedback in early times, and they were super supportive with that, and they helped us a lot with curbing that one. And it's interesting to see the not great feedback with best-selling product, but this is the thing, again, our customers were very vocal. And yeah, overall was a success with all the constraints and context that we had to manage in place. So yeah, I think this is it for now. Let me know if you have any questions or anything that you'd like me to go over. That's it. It's a lot of information.
Awesome. Thank you, Inez. That's really, really great. Really, really appreciate it. I'm just going to open it up here for Q&A. If folks do have questions, feel free to ask. We can also do the Q&A, or if we got any things that do get posted inside the chat, we'll grab them there as well. One question here, I guess it's coming from Udine, is how do you prioritize feedback from vocal users and silent users? I guess that's related to obviously the strategy and the feedback inputs that are part of that.
Yeah, very good. That's an amazing question. I had in one of the last two companies I worked in, we had this conversation quite often because, especially, for example, think about a B2B context, you have a lot more layers to your client base. You have the influencers who are normally very loud, all down to the user side of things. And if you think about it as well from a regulation technology point of view, financial regulation, they might not be the most talkative people. It was an assumption that proved to be wrong. They love that you ask questions. And they were possibly my favorite customers of all times because they were always available. But in terms of the silent customers, we try and use different techniques of feedback. So some people will be more comfortable with coming into the office, well, pre-pandemic, obviously, coming to the office and do this kind of sort of tests. Some people might prefer to do a user survey. Some people, nowadays there's so many different approaches to this, and I guess that thinking a little bit about the design mindset and the human aspect is going to meet your customers where they are and how they like to work. That's normally how I've managed things in the past and have balanced things in the past. So some people might be more vocal and might be loud on Twitter, for example, because they'll be complaining. Some others will be giving you very good reviews on Amazon. So you need to be identifying where people feel more comfortable and have a holistic approach to how you collect feedback.
Yeah, maybe to build on that a little bit. It sounds like based on your talk too as well, it's really important for us to be curious, to bring that curiosity to this, to again, elicit and gather that feedback, and we've got to be energetic and try new things and test different ways of doing that. That's a really critical part that we play essentially as product people in that task.
Definitely. Yeah. And your design friends will be, if you always think about the best discussions and arguments that I've had with the design team was, but what is it that you're trying to learn here? What is it? Who is it that you need feedback from? And through that, and being able to be transparent with each other, we actually found really creative ways to go and meet these customers.
Yeah, definitely. I know a lot of people struggle with strategy. It's at one part, it's a very loaded word, as you talked about, I think a little bit earlier on. Lots of different perceptions of what strategy is or isn't. Is it the how, the what, the why, is it the whole thing, that kind of stuff. What I guess really, really curious about is just the approach you take to revisiting strategy. What are the triggers maybe to revisiting that? And likewise, what are the maybe the moments in time where you like to take that look back and replan?
Definitely. It's If I was thinking about this quite a bit yesterday, actually, because if you think about strategy in a game, either that being sports or a board game, you know exactly when the cycle that strategy starts and when it ends and when it finishes. With businesses, is a little bit more difficult to understand the start and the stop, and so that reflects on how we reflect on strategy as well. Like, for example, coaches in an NFL game will be, or NBA game will be assessing strategy from beginning of the season until the end of the season, and then each game will have a different approach to it. Yeah. But in business, we don't really. It feels like we don't really have set the time to assess that, and so it will depend on what level we're talking about. Rule of thumb again, high level strategy, a year cycle, because then the middle piece, the tactics and the operations will probably change on a quarterly basis. Mm-hmm. And then your operational side or your experience side will probably be based on the cycle of your releases, either that being on a 2-week basis. And so it's so important to have rituals like retros, because you get to identify as a team if your plan is working or not, and how that feedback is looping in, because we always need to keep that externality in place. Yeah. I guess that if I could just add one more thing, the most challenging one is when you're in very disruptive markets and you're doing a lot of stuff from scratch, because you might not necessarily have the tempo is being set for you rather than you having a more set of constraints that you define.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe kind of building on that, another question from somebody else here is, how often do you think it's okay to change that strategy and why?
It will be about managing that tension, right? You don't know if it worked if you don't see it through. That's a simple way to answer. It's important. It's that tension between having enough information to help you move forward, so that you make informed decisions. If you're always there's a bit of a tension between agile as well sometimes, because I've worked in companies in the past where people were constantly changing strategy on a bi-weekly basis, as in overall strategy, and the answer that I had back was like, "Oh, we're agile." I was like, "No, that's that's not what agile.
That's chaos."
Yeah, and not even organized chaos. It's just yeah, you read the next book and now we need to change everything, right? Yeah. It's not really strategy. You need to have, the context, the constraints need to be set. You need to understand what you're going to do, why you're doing it. It needs to be coherent and consistent across the board. Yeah. You do a cycle, you define what that cycle is. If there's no constraints in the market, you define your own constraints so you can assess feedback and learn for the next one.
That's good. Question here from Clinton. How much weight should be placed on user feedback versus analytics? So I guess that's the qual versus the quant. You said particularly often enterprise seems to want to place more money on the numbers, more focused on those, obviously, versus the human interactions. And so how do you balance that? How do you take those two into account?
It's really interesting that you say that. I feel like sometimes in a lot of enterprise companies that I worked in the past, it was actually, especially in a B2B context, is actually the opposite. Normally, they're not very good at the quant aspect, and they're very, very good at the qual aspect. The salesperson goes out and has a chat. The customer asked this. It's you need to have both. Again, thinking about that, find the balance between the tensions is understanding why do you need that information for? Are you trying to make something better, or are you building something from scratch? Are you trying to find if you have a market opportunity? Because you'll need to use different tools to find those answers. And It's not about or, is about and, because they will provide the whole picture. You might give you the numbers, but you don't know why people are giving you those numbers. The numbers normally come from a a survey or come from a something that you programmed and you're asking the question a certain way, you might have different results if you ask the same question a different way. So that's why the qualitative aspect is very important. But also, again, think about your context and think about your constraints. What do you know today might not be the same tomorrow, and you might need to coach or support. Maybe coach is a strong word depending on where you are, but you sometimes is just about playing with the cards that you handle, taking an expression from Jason here, but also always try and be better, a little bit better next time.
Yeah. One last question maybe here is, how do you weigh feedback from subject matter experts versus user research, which may be very different, or perhaps even some cases maybe in conflict, right?
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love that question. I feel like I spent a lot of time working with in between user feedback and subject matter expertise, which is different. So I saw the last comment, it's like example, hippos. I don't necessarily categorize hippos as subject matter experts. They might be, but they also might not be. And it's really important to identify who they are. So categorize them, put them into context. But how to manage that, it will always be difficult. But I think that's where the design mindset around show and tell comes in very handy. And normally understanding where, for example, if you look at the hippos aspect, their fear normally stems from a place of lack of control. And if they feel like they're lack of control, is because probably there's not a lot of visibility of what the work that you're doing. This is where roadmaps and things come into play. Very helpful for you in communicating those, but balancing those, I always take that when I try and have in the same place feedback and roadmap initiatives and things like that all together. And the way that I take in is internal feedback and external feedback, but they're all points of information, and that's how you categorize them. They will help you, but they're people communicating their needs, they're people communicating their fears, it's people communicating what they want, and you need to translate all of that into information points that you put in your buckets. That big bucket that I had there is actually a bucket that I have on my mirror boards, is the bucket with information. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. That's really great. Thanks so much, Inez. This is really, super interesting, really compelling. Lots of great information shared. And I really, really appreciate you taking the time to just talk on this really complex topic. I know it's, like, to your point, a lot going on here, but there's a lot there's literally a lot going on in strategy. Strategy is a very difficult thing, and I know a lot of people definitely struggle with it and find some time. If you do have some time afterwards, maybe some great examples that you can share about, organizations that have done strategy, maybe some of the templates and frameworks you found helpful. It'd be great if we can include that as well in our recap. Feel free to share some over that you think might be helpful on that end.
Absolutely. I'll be sharing some articles as well that from other points, like, for example, design management. There's this really interesting article about how it evolved over the past 40 years. It's I feel like it really ties everything together. So I'm more than happy to put the links or share the documents themselves.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. So with that, I will wrap things up and let people get on with their day. Just a few things to kind of clear up. We've shared out a little bit of a link for our post-event survey. Please do take a moment to feedback on this. We'll definitely, I know Inez would appreciate it, and so would we. We're always trying to make our events better, and speakers as well are trying to make their decks and talks better over time as well. So please take a moment to do that. We do have some opportunities to win some prizes as well too that we do monthly to draw out on that side. So just as a little incentive on that end. If you want to continue the discussion, any questions on this side, feel free to create a post in our community. We'd be happy to answer any questions there or get into a further discussion on the topic as well. We've got some great events coming up in the next little while here. Kara Zucker speaking on July the 28th, and then we'll be taking a break over August. I'm actually going to go take some holiday for a change, which is great. But we'll be joining back in September with Chris Daniel, talking about using Wardley maps for strategy, which will be kind of interesting. We've got our product makers roundtable, so again, a chance maybe to talk strategy with some of your other fellow product peers. We have JJ Rory coming in to talk about the 5 immutable truths of product managers. And we have Katja and Daniel as well coming back to tackle the challenge of approaching leadership in product. I think it's a really great event. Lots of other ways to get involved as well. We just launched our Maker Mentor program, which is our mentorship matching program. We just did our first cohort beginning in July here, but you can get ready for the next one come this fall. We've got our roundtables happening, our Meet a Maker program, which matches you regularly. And likewise, if you got something to share, if you've got an opinion, something about product that you want to teach other people, we'd love to hear from you and get you up here as a speaker. Feel free to reach out. You can find details on our website about that. And with that, thank you very much again, Inez, for joining us. And thank you everybody for taking the time today to come on out. I really, really appreciate it.